Coming up on the Branding Deep Dive podcast.
You want to chase legacy, not vanity. And that's why you need to figure out what do you want to contribute to the world. And it goes hand in hand with all of these. But in a branding context, the important part is that what makes you unique is what people will remember about you. Your internal diversity is what's going to stand out.
This is Ahmed Chima, and welcome to the Branding Deep Dive podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast where we have in-depth discussions about what brands are doing well to drive customer loyalty and how you can take those principles and apply them to your own brand. Today, we're talking to Sina Port. Sina is a brand strategist who has worked with startups, entrepreneurs, and global corporations on purpose-driven brand campaigns to create standout content and authentic communication with their customers, partners, collaborators, and communities. She's also the host of the award-winning podcast Shared Diversity, where she shares the unique experiences of women founders and entrepreneurs who use the power of diversity in business, branding, and womanhood. In this episode, we dive deep into diversity, purpose marketing, developing relationships, why it's important to build your personal brand, seeking out data to drive your decisions, and much, much more. If you're looking to build your personal brand, this episode is a must listen. Now, here's Sina Port. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Sina. Welcome to the show. First off, thank you so much for being on. It's an honor. I've seen your work from afar, so really appreciate you coming on. For the audience that may not be familiar with who you are and the work you do, can you give them a brief introduction?
Sure. Wa alaikum assalam, by the way. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sina. I'm from Germany. I am a brand strategist, and I work specifically in purpose marketing and inclusive branding. And what that means is I support diverse talents that are usually underrepresented in the industry to build a personal brand that is true to who they are. And I work also with bigger companies and bigger brands who would like to gain access to diverse communities to create purpose-driven marketing and branding.
That's really, so I think you're the first person that I've ever met that has that job title, job function. So I'm really curious, how did you get into purpose marketing and this kind of the space you're in?
Sure, it was kind of organic. So I've been in branding for a decade now, and I've been always looking at branding from a very inclusive lens just because I'm a woman of color. When I converted to Islam, of course, that was also another diversity I mentioned that came in. Being in the West, underrepresented, that is just something that I personally always look at. What do I need? What do people like me need? And what are kind of the needs that I would have had as a teenager and I would have liked to see. And specifically in the branding space, with your podcast, you know the kind of branding landscape, but there's not a lot of diversity in it. And some of the biggest branding leaders are not really targeting their branding strategies to diverse communities and specifically Muslim women. When we talk about personal branding, we talk about modesty in branding and kind of, personal preferences of would you like to show your face or not? Do you want to, say something about your personal life? As some women talk to me, they say, I don't want to show my face and I don't want people to hear my voice. So of course, that's something that, normal branding strategists would say, that doesn't work. You have to work with video. People need to know your personality, and that's the only way. But there are strategies that you can apply where you can still build a reputation. And then, of course, when it comes to companies, I was always working in consulting companies that don't really have the insight into diverse communities and what it takes to connect to them and actually have a positive impact. Of course, you have data around, the billion-dollar Muslim consumer market or, the BIPOC market and the Black-owned businesses that companies now want to support. But there's so much diversity within our communities. We can't just say we are targeting the Muslim consumer or the Black consumer. We need to go deeper and go into the communities and ask them for their insights.
What I'm curious about is you worked with individuals and then also large businesses and corporations. How do you personally find the best way to measure brand impact? Because it is something that is so intangible and something that, doesn't necessarily have likes and stuff like that, right? How do you measure impressions and how good of a job you're doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's of course for me personally different if I work with individuals or if I measure impact for companies. For companies, one of the biggest things is purpose marketing doesn't only apply to product related purpose marketing. Let's say you have an inclusive product and you want to bring it to the market, but it also includes brand marketing and brand strategy. And that is something that is a bit more difficult to measure because how do you measure the perception that a market has on your brand? But some of the things that we do is really qualitative research, and of course, social listening tools, all these kind of things that you can work with nowadays. But then also working with communities, and those are communities within a brand or corporation, and also externally. So let's say I work with a brand that is in the food and beverage business, and they want to find out how to do a non-alcoholic drink for the Muslim market during Ramadan. And just came up with this example, so let me think. So you have, for instance, employees that are Muslim within the company that said, "Hey, this would be a great product. We would love to have this Eid campaign or this Ramadan campaign. Why don't we, work on this?" And they would tell you, "Okay, these are the needs that we see in our market based on research and based on personal experience." But then ideally you would also work with external consumers and external communities that would say, "Hey, this is something that we usually do if we have like a Muslim book launch. This is kind of like the food and beverage we would like to have, and they are not out there yet. So this is what we're looking for. We're looking for non-alcoholic, but that are not too sweet and don't have too much sugar, and ideally, talk about sunnah, nutrition, and all these kind of things, right?" That is something that the company probably would not think of
Mm.
themselves. So they would say like, "Okay, non-alcoholic, that makes sense. Muslims don't drink alcohol, at least most of them. But Sunnah nutrition, that's something we've never heard of. Can you tell us a bit more about that? How can we make it so that the new generation is also interested in this kind of beverage?" So important is that if I work in a corporation, I can say I'm a Muslim. I can give you my perspective. I might give you a perspective if I have a community or I have a brand, so I have kind of like consumer insights for my audience, but I cannot represent the entire Muslim community. So let's work with outside communities that might reflect our consumer base. So let's say, a Gen Z community, they are like 16 to 22, and they can tell us what kind of marketing approach that they would like to see from a brand like us. So it's important to kind of work with those communities to get these insights.
One thing that comes to mind is, you have an audience and you can just directly ask them questions. And then the businesses have access to resources and they can just, spend money on getting that information. But for someone that may not have an audience and, they don't have tons of money to spend on research, how do you actually gain these insights and find, you know, qualitative data to actually drive your brand decisions?
Are you talking about a personal brand or a business brand?
Personal, just like me, right?
Okay.
Like if I don't have a major audience or anything like that, like how do I make sure I'm making the right decisions and launching the right products um, without like a ton of money to spend on research?
Okay, so I started really small. I started on Instagram. I think I had the first 3 years about 200 followers, maybe 300, and then it moved into like 800. But like after 3 years, it didn't have a lot of followers. So for me, it was more like, what did I want to have in my position in terms of like me 10 years ago? Or what do my friends always ask me about? So that is always a really good start. Let's say you have zero social media presence. Googling what your consumer market wants to have is probably not very efficient, specifically if your consumer market is in, a smaller niche, underrepresented community. Then ideally you would think about, and there it's different than a service or a product. A service, I would say, what are the things that your friends always ask you about, something that you're good at, or where they always want your opinion. Maybe you're really good at understanding fashion style, or you're really good at finance and you understand kind of like what are the different levels of investments you can have, or you can start having, right? You can start taking when you're a young professional. So you need to kind of really look into your small community, and it's really valuable because those 4 to 5 to even 10 friends that tell you like this is something that I always come to you for,
Mm.
those then reflect. If you go out and you have a big audience, it's just going to multiply. It's not going to be a very, very different audience. You start from there, you create something, and then you look for feedback. When it comes to product, the important thing is that you understand your consumers are on a journey. What part of the journey are they on now? So one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they put up a product for their personal brand is that they put a product that makes them look good, or that they think will make them look professional or like they're an expert in the field. And the importance is not, it's not really about you, and you're going to waste your time if you create a random product and then are trying to sell it, right? Specifically, if your personal brand, selling just is, it feels very cringy. That's one of the feedback that I always get. Like, I hate selling. It just makes me feel weird, and I'm like a different person when I do it. So don't even try it. Ask people what would they like to have from you? What would they like to receive? And then find out on what type of journey they are. When I started creating a personal branding advice for young women, I was thinking, okay, let me just create an entire course on personal branding, because just give you all the knowledge that I have. But actually, my audience wasn't really ready for that yet. What they wanted to do is just figure out what kind of content they like to do. And one of the easiest parts that I started with is creating a podcast. You don't need to show your face. You don't need people to, look at you while you're talking. You can just focus on the information. And I didn't know that people were so interested in creating a podcast until I actually read all my DMs, and I asked all my friends, and I read all the comments, and I asked people directly in the DMs. I was like, "Hey, thank you so much for following. What do you like to see? What brought you here?" And 70% of the time, people said, "Your podcast tips brought me here." It's like, "Oh, okay. Would you like to know more about it?" "Yeah, I would love to have a course, maybe a community where I can interact with other women who are in the process, because I need accountability." So you really need to engage. And even it's just like, to be honest, even now with 10,000 followers, if someone tells me, "Sina, I really want this topic to be in your Instagram highlights, or can you create a course about this topic?" I go out and research. I'm not like, okay, it's just one person who wants this. I go out and research. I ask other people, "Do you want that too?" And if there is a majority of people who are interested in it, I'm like, "Oh, okay. Allah gave me that sign from only that one person. Let me follow up. Let me see if there's something."
I think one of the things that for our audience to take away is that you don't need to have 10,000 followers. Everyone has a community, right? Everyone has some friends that you talk to, you interact with. So put out some products, or put out some content, get feedback, talk to them, and understand what they reach out to you for, how they view you, right? Next thing I want to dive into is why it's so important. And I think for this question in particular, just looking at just Muslims in general, like, why is it so important to have a personal brand nowadays, right? And I mean, this is you can take it whatever way you want to take it, but I think one of the things that I'm interested in is, like, why is it, from your lens, like, why is it important for Muslim women in particular to have a personal brand and make sure that they have a voice and they're speaking up?
One part is from ourselves. I think, we were created to have a voice and to use what we were blessed with to share with the world for the better of others. And that's intrinsic. That's something that comes from you. And I think everyone has that feeling and that drive for self-expression, and also to express yourself for a greater good, to have some kind of positive impact, and to see that impact in the world. We like to make a lot of money, and that's fine, but it doesn't help us become happy or fulfilled. Or we know there's this, even people who might not be people of faith, they have that internal feeling that this is not all that is there, right? So it's something intrinsic. I think it's very important for us. It's important for us to also, specific from Muslim women, to understand that we have so much to give, and we can decide how we bring it to the world. And then, of course, you have external factors like misrepresentation of women, misrepresentation of Muslims when you look at TV and movies and just the general news. There's so much misrepresentation of who we are. And of course, those are going to create stereotypes. Those stereotypes are going to face you whether you like it or not. If you meet a person and you are visibly Muslim, they will have expectations around who you are. Even if they're very open-minded, there's some kind of expectation that they put on you, some kind of image that they think you comply with. And that's why it's so important that we regain that narrative and we understand we build an image for ourselves before people can build an image of us. So we create that narrative. We show them what we want. And the other part of the big part of personal branding is that you attract what you reflect. If you want the right companies and people and opportunities to come to you with those values that you have, then you need to reflect that to the world. You can't just go out there and be like, hey, I'm in this kind of business. I'm in the fashion industry. And then you're going to have a lot of noise coming at you like, okay, let's, shoot this picture or this outfit. And you're like, nah, I don't think this works with me and my values and how I want to portray women with my styling. Instead, just attract what you actually want what you want into your life by saying, these are my values, this is how I want to portray, this is the kind of impact I want to have on the fashion industry, let's say, and this is the kind of message I want to bring out into the world, and that's what you will attract into your life.
One of the things that a lot of people struggle with in the beginning especially is what do I talk about, what do I create content about, and then it can be easy to, like, especially with, I've seen this a lot more with TikTok, where like, okay, this is what's trending now, let me create a video that's just like this, right, and try to hop on this train. How do you, with all this noise, all these numbers, like everything is, all the algorithms are designed to kind of get you in this mindset of how do I get the most likes, how do I get the biggest following. How do you actually stop that thinking and make sure that you are thinking through your values and presenting your true self?
Mostly because I wouldn't be the person going out and following a trend and being like, oh yeah, this is like the trending music and I'm going to dance in front of the camera. Like, that's just not who I am. I don't use music in my content anyways because I know my audience doesn't like it. So there's just a lot of noise out there. Number one is data is important. Trends are important. Algorithms are important. But the important part for you is that you find what works for you. So what I always say is the perfect alignment in your business and your brand is aligning your resources with your personality. Your personality could, for instance, be very introverted, or you're very extroverted. You love to read, you love to watch YouTube, you love to listen to podcasts. If you are a consumer, you're probably really good at creating. So let's say you started your podcast because you're interested in podcasts, right? That's how you started. Yeah.
Yep.
So you listen to a bunch of podcasts and you're like, oh, okay, this is the type of podcast I like. This is not what I really like. Like, I don't like all the ads. I like this intro like a lot. I like kind of the deep conversation interview format more than the I'm just going to talk for an hour about a topic format. Like, you are going to be a really good creator because you are a really good consumer. You will know the platform more than anyone else. So understand, where does your personality fit in? And then you already have an advantage to other people coming to the platform because you were already in the position of a consumer. You know what a consumer would like to see. So it's more it's easier for you to create that content around that. On the other part, it's, what is your personality? There are so many different ways of expressing yourself. It's not only through audio or video, or TikTok does not only have to be following trends, or it could also be other content formats. It could be the type of video you create. Some TikTokers just became famous because they use a camera instead of a phone to create content. So everyone on TikTok was like, whoa, this is really high quality, like HD stuff that I see, compared to other content that's super shaky. So you need to find what is standing out for you. And the other part is something that you mentioned before, which was before we started, was the understanding of, are you going to chase vanity or are you going to chase legacy? And for me, it's really about, if I look back to this in 10 years, do I feel the person I am then? This piece of content contributed to who I am or to the value that I wanted to bring to people at the time? Or did I just do it for the views?
Mm.
And you can do something for the views, but create value and put intention into it, because it's fine to follow trends. You just have to find your angle, and you need to make sure that you don't betray yourself while you do it. So that thought of like, if I create this now, is it going to actually help and contribute to people? Is it going to steer any drama? Because people are, a lot of times they just put out, the type of content because it has that keyword or it's clickbaity and they want to stir drama because that gives you views and engagement. You need to find out what you're going to be fine with in a couple of years.
So really just taking a step back, looking at, hey, am I going to be proud of this 5 years, 10 years down the line? And does this reflect where I want to be 5, 10 years down the line? I think that's a really good exercise for anyone that's trying to, um, start their journey. So another thing that I think, this is me personally asking, so this is just a question I had. So I started this podcast, and um, I'm someone that just has like a lot of interests, right? So there's
Mhm.
like, branding is just one of them, right? And I enjoy this. And then I try to, even on this podcast, I try to bring in a lot of people that are not branding people that I just want to
Yeah.
learn from, right? It's just like, I just, there's so many things that I'm interested in. And I think the toughest part for me initially was like, okay, where do I, do I, on my personal brand, do I make it like, am I just focusing on branding, or can I have, like on my Instagram, for example, can a little bit of, I'm also into like a little bit of like Urdu, Punjabi poetry.
Mhm.
And then I'm also into like really into like leadership and studying like business and stuff like that. So like, can I have a mix of all that on my like profile, or is that going to confuse my audience? And that's one thing I still don't know. I mean, I've just been posting everything. I don't really have a strategy behind it, but just wanted to get your take on that.
The good part about having a personal brand is that it's rooted in your personality, and people will feel attracted to you because of who you are. And no one is one dimensional. We are all, diverse beings. That's why I called my podcast "Share Your Diversity," because within us there's so much diversity. And when it comes to it, now we can go into the tool of Instagram, for instance. On Instagram, you have space for a bio, right? Why don't you choose like these 2 to 3 areas that you want to portray on Instagram and try to put it into your bio? So, for instance, Urdu poetry loving branding enthusiasts who loves to share leadership advice. Right? I'm just making this up, but like finding the angle to it. And
Mm.
the interesting thing is we know that there's nothing unique out there, right? Like no idea is original. Everything is a remix because we've been living for so many, like humanity has just been for so many years, and um, we've been learning from older generations. We've just been remixing it into our time. The knowledge that we bring to this table is not going to be super new. It's just going to be adapted to our times. So there could be another person who shares leadership examples and branding advice and has a podcast out there just like you, but that person is not you. And so it's important to bring your personality into the mix so people can actually get, this is a weird term. People say, can I get addicted to you? Because they literally just go to your page to see like, how are you today? How is Ahmed
Mm.
today? And what's new in the poetry thing, because today is Friday. I don't want to do any self-development. I just want to read something nice. So that's the beauty about a personal brand, is you don't necessarily need to choose, but you need to bring it into a format or a package that makes sense to you and makes sense
Mm.
to your audience. Ideally, you could put it into a format like a bio or on your website, or even in your description of your podcast or on your YouTube channel above. Something that people instantly, if I don't know you and I haven't seen any video of you, but someone dropped your name, I can go to your page and be like, I think I like this guy, and I'm gonna stay here, right? That's the ideal version. If not, you're just gonna take time because people need to follow you to get to know you. And that's something that I struggled with a lot in the beginning because I did not want anyone to know about my personal life. People still don't know about my personal life. I'm not going to share anything. But what I will share is like personal reflections, things that might have happened in my life, and whether that's like a positive thing or a negative thing. And I will share a reflection that is very unique to me. For me, for now, the uniqueness is in being a Muslim woman in Germany and working with bigger brands, being in the branding space. Because when I started my podcast, most of the Muslim women content was around fashion and makeup. And that's I didn't need to do much other than talk about the things that I was interested in because that already made me stand out. And that's why people kind of gravitated to me because they were like, oh, finally, some content that is not on beauty. They wanted to see something else, and they wanted to see someone who looked like them to talk about that. But now I've been getting a lot of messages and like, can't you share a bit more about how it is to be a Muslim woman in Germany in a small village? Being on the Adidas campus, for instance, like these kind of like things that are very unique to me and my person, that would make people sort of addicted to the personality behind you, not only the value you bring.
I think this was on your website, it might have been somewhere else, but it says your diversity equals your brand equals your impact. And I thought this was interesting. I've never seen it like that, but I was just wondering if you could walk us through what this means and um, how to actually interpret this.
Sure. So it kind of brings together the topics that we talked about. You are diverse in yourself. There's so much about you that you want to share with the world. You want to chase legacy, not vanity. And that's why you need to figure out what do you want to contribute to the world. And it goes hand in hand with all of these. But in a branding context, the important part is that what makes you unique is what people will remember about you. Your internal diversity is what's going to stand out. And the funny thing is that until now, media and probably ourselves as well, we've kind of put ourselves into like a victim role, misrepresentation of people of color and Muslims, blah, blah, blah. But actually it's making us stand out. So an example, when I first arrived and worked with Adidas, I came to the campus and I was one of the only women with hijab. I work in communications, so naturally I'm a very present person in any kind of meeting or like a campaign or just sharing content that not a lot of people do. So people always came to me and said, oh, you're a Muslim woman. By the way, I don't know you, but I saw you somewhere. Can you help us with this Adidas hijab or this, full cover swimwear suit? I'm like, I'm not a designer. What do you want from me? But like, no, just like help us test this. Tell us like, what do you like about it? Do you want any kind of other silhouette? Can you support us with community, connection? So this is actually something. And at the same time, people came to me and said like, can we create a prayer room in the headquarter, or can you help us to find like to set up a Friday prayer all together as employees? Me standing out, I could have said like, oh, I'm just like the diversity token, everyone just talks about with me because I'm a Muslim. But actually it made me explore um, much more situations, and I got to know many more people because the way I look already made me stand out. And I chose that attention and turned it into something that's meaningful for me. So when then, people ask me like, is there a prayer room? I said, yes, we just set one up, and then we're going to set another two up in the other two buildings so people can pray during, lunchtime. And for me, it was much more important that I would use that attention, even if I didn't feel good while it was on me. I would use what I have to make something good out of it. And that's why you always have to, and I had this conversation with my husband today, you have to make the best out of the worst. If there's a situation that you don't personally like, if you are, for instance, misrepresented or oppressed even in a society, what is the best you can make out of it? And it could be a struggle in your life. I've worked with a friend of mine. she advocated for the hijab in basketball, but she's also talking about her mental health issues. Actually, I'm going to promote her now. I have her book as my Badawi. She's a mental health. She does poetry around mental health because she was struggling personally with mental health. Now she could say, I'm a Black woman and a Muslim woman. I'm oppressed. You know, not even in my sport. I'm allowed to wear the hijab. But what she does out of it is actually helping other girls who have eating disorders or who feel like they don't fit in, and she's making her own space. So making something out of what you might be struggling with or what people might not understand about you, that is the key to your brand, because you're getting attention straight away and people remember you. They're like, oh, this is the Muslim girl who like does this and this and she's there and there. Like it's memorable, right? And you create impact because you think about, what can I do with this that will last and that will actually support other people. And for me, I talk a lot about inclusion also in businesses, and we have different communities like the BIPOC community, faith community. And when I work with these kind of communities, one thing that they say is, even if right now I'm not feeling comfortable in the space I am because microaggressions and racism and whatever, at least I know I'm here to do something better. So the next person that comes into this project or this industry, they have it better than me. And that's the impact. That's the legacy.
That's powerful. I think one of the things, I don't know how it is in Germany, but in America, especially a lot of the immigrants that came over, so like my parents, and there's a lot of, the narrative is always like, hey, we don't want to stand out, we want to fit in, right? And so you kind of have to get rid of what makes you diverse and what makes you different and try to fit in. But then what you're highlighting here is that when you do that, you lose opportunity to have impact. You just become a follower, right? And if you really want to take control of your narrative and really make impact, you need to understand what your values are and put it out there, right? Like whatever that means for you, you can decide and kind of create in a way that fits you. But you need to make sure that you are not trying to conform and not trying to be the same as everyone else if you really want to have impact. Last thing I wanted to ask was about so since I started this podcast, a lot of the feedback I get from people that don't actually listen to podcasts is like, does anyone actually even listen to podcasts? Right? And I'm like, yeah, they do, right? Like I listen to them, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, like, what tips do you have for someone that may be interested in podcasting? I know you have a whole course, and they can check that out if they're interested. But what advice do you have for someone that's looking to start out in podcasting? Just general advice for creating a good podcast.
Okay, number one is don't overthink it. I think a lot of people don't start because like, I don't have equipment, I don't have money for like a fancy, microphone. You can start with your phone. You can start with a very, like small microphone. Just make sure that you're in a quiet room, that you don't have distractions and no background noise. And that's from a point of view because I know a lot of people say like, I'm not a technical person. I don't know the editing part. Everything is for free. All the editing softwares are free. I use, for instance, Audacity. It's a really, easy place to start. And then don't overthink it because, the biggest podcast, let's say Gary Vee, even, the king of content, he never edits his podcast. You hear some like loud noises in the background, you hear some like irrelevant, conversation, but there's like 20% of the podcast is really valuable and people listen to it. So don't overthink it. I think the second part is you need to find out what works for you. I think one of the biggest reasons I started a podcast, and the purpose and the intention is really important. I freshly converted to Islam. I had just cut off all my network and friends and all my online presence, everything. And for me, it was very important to get in contact with people that I admired, that I would not usually be in contact with. So like a person from LA, or, when I was living in London, like people from Kuala Lumpur, or people that would usually not maybe give me the time of day, people that I would not usually see in a networking event, and people that I would know fit to my values. So instead of going on a networking event and like being the only Muslim woman and trying to like avoid shaking hands with people, like I just like cut out all of that. And my intention was getting to know people and have a deep conversation with them and bring that value to other women and people that don't have the access to those people. So understand your intention and your format. I always recommend interviews because it doesn't put you in the seat to need to talk for an hour, and it helps you to network. So it's like the trifecta of value. You create a podcast, you create value for people, and you network. And then I think I always left 1, 2, 3. So third is you don't need to be perfect. In the beginning, I would cut out literally, I mean, this is your podcast. I would cut out my own breath, while I was talking, and you would hear, like I would cut it out and it would take me 4 hours to edit 20 minutes. Don't do that. Like people really love authenticity, and it's not only a saying, it's backed up by data. People don't want to hear anything polished, and it's also going to sound weird if you cut out your breath. So just be yourself. Don't worry. I'm not my first language is not English, so sometimes my grammar is messed up. It's fine, it's totally fine. Like that's just part of my personality, and I'm learning. So those are the three things. And anything else, always happy for any thoughts or questions you might have. Just check me out on Instagram and I'll answer them there.
Where can people find you if they're trying to get in touch?
So my podcast is on all podcasting platforms, Shared Diversity Podcast, and on YouTube. And myself, you can find me on sinaport.com and Sina Port Official on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sister Sina. If you missed any of those links, don't worry. I put all the links in the show notes. Now, as always, I have my key takeaways from this episode, but before we get into that, I want to share a clip with you from our discussion with DP Knuten on crafting your nonfiction brand.
When you get to your Yoda years, it pays to be respected as a Yoda for whatever you do. How do you get that respect? You've earned it by showing people and demonstrating that you've been this master Jedi for years and years and years until you get just like Gary Vaynerchuk. You get surrounded by young 20-year-old guys who are like, how can I be exactly like you? And he would say, you don't ever get to be exactly like me. You have to be exactly like you. And that's my point, which is you have to know exactly who you are, what you do, and how you do it at a first principle level.
If you enjoyed this discussion with Sina, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the discussion with DP. Check it out wherever you're listening to this podcast. It is episode number 30. Now here are my key takeaways. Number 1, you attract what you reflect. Take ownership of your brand. Don't be afraid to share the values and the impact that you want to have with the world. This will help you attract opportunities that are in line with those values. And number 2, not having a giant following is not an excuse for not collecting data. Everyone has a community that they can seek feedback from. Ask yourself, what do people reach out to me for? Ask your friends, hey, what do you go to me for? Using this data before you create content or create a product will set you up for success. And that is all for this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion, please consider leaving a review and sharing with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.